Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a very spooky AES, Halloween Sound for Disneyland. We have some rock stars in our midst tonight. I'm really excited to bring this presentation to you. I'm Karen Eckhoff, the Vice Chair of the AES LA section, and I'm going to be moderating tonight. I just want to stop for a second right now and take a minute to remember our friend Ed Cherney, who is a titan in our industry and who passed away Monday after a long battle with cancer. So I'd just like to take a moment to remember him. Tonight we're going to explore sound design, scoring, mixing, and timing of theme park attractions and shows. Our panelists have extensive experience creating entertaining rides and spectacular live sound design, including the transformation of the Haunted Mansion into the Nightmare Before Christmas, which is what I love. Robin Broad is an award-winning producer and designer who has worked on projects including Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, Soaring Over California and the World, and the Iron Man experience at Hong Kong Disneyland. She's currently a principal designer and creative audio producer at Walt Disney Imagineering, where she's been for over 20 years. She started when she was 2. She has won Thea Awards for projects including Guardians of the Galaxy audio design and implementation, Soarin' Over California, and Mystic Manor Sound at Hong Kong Disneyland. In addition, she has done theater design for the La Jolla Playhouse, off-Broadway, and internationally in Greece and Japan. Her focus is on innovation in both sound design and audio engineering, but she believes that reaching to the human elements creates the most effective sound design. She is a graduate of CalArts. Bruce Healey, immediately to my right, is a composer who has been responsible for music replacement at the Haunted Mansion and It's a Small World. During his more than 30 years as principal music director-producer for the Walt Disney Company, he created sound design for numerous stage shows, fireworks displays, and parades. In addition, Bruce has created special arrangements for the Cincinnati Pops, the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra, the Disney Concert Library, Hal Leonard, Schirmer, and his own company, All Sun Music Company. Bruce has composed and conducted music for many television specials and special events produced by Disneyland and Walt Disney Special Events. He has also produced soundtracks for recorded and live performance music projects. He is a graduate of Cal State Fullerton. Now, before we get into this tonight, I have a trivia question, and you guys can't play because you already know the answer. Let's see if we have any Disney files in the audience. How many official rides are there at Disneyland? It's a trick question. There's no rides at Disneyland, they're all attractions. Sorry. They did that to us at our orientation, I'm sorry. Okay, well, let's ledge into this then. So, when you have a vision for an attraction or a spectacular, where do you start? What goes into planning the sound design for an attraction? Who is involved in it? What's the collaboration process from start? And how long does it take?
I'm going to let Robin start with that one because my process and path through, my process and path through all of this is quite different, I'm sure, than Robin's is. So, and mine is, well, it's just different. So I'll let you describe yours.
All right. I'll try and pop as well as you pop over there with that microphone. So I start right at Blue Sky, and it starts with story. If I don't have a story, I tend to abstain. So I'll come back when we have a story. And we have a lot of discussions, a lot of what's the purpose of this story? What do we need to tell? What do we need to do? What's the audience? So I absolutely want to know who I'm talking to. And we work session it. We have to talk. We use a lot of pencils and paper. I don't know if you guys use a lot of pencils and paper, but
Wow, that's so analog.
Yes, because we can everyone talks about the digital pipeline. You need to be in a room. You need to talk with each other. You need to spend time with each other. You need to develop trust in a team. And that team is where the feeling of that story is going to come from and where that attraction is going to come from. And you're going to work with that team for 4 to 5 years.
Wow.
So we have to start from there.
So you develop some really strong relationships with the people that you're working with.
You do. Especially when you're on the streets of Hong Kong with them every night during an installation for a year. That's some fun stuff. But so you have to start with what's at Disney Company, at least. We have to start with what's the story, and I like to know who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to children, that's a completely different issue than if I'm talking to 18-year-olds, college students. They're looking for different things. They have different physical tolerances. A child can't tolerate what everyone here in this audience can tolerate. So I like to consider that in every step. So, from there we go into architecture, and my first careers were architecture and lighting. So I'm big on acoustics. I spent 4 years on acoustics. This room from here, I don't know if it sounds good out there, from here this room is pretty hard to deal with. So I would not want to design a room like this. And I wouldn't expect anyone to put a sound design in a room like this. I want to make sure when we get to the field, we have a gorgeous acoustic environment, that we have every speaker meticulously selected for exactly what it needs to do, the type of speaker that needs to address that sound. And I like to make sure that we have all the racks in place so that when we get into mixing, we have our tools. I don't want to give anyone a bathtub to mix in,
How do you acoustically treat a space if you're working in a space that was previously something else? I know that you did Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, which was previously the Hollywood Tower of Terror, and that had already, the infrastructure was already there. How do you deal with that?
So I'm wondering, do you want to answer the development question first, and then I can definitely talk to that, because that's a big question.
Because we never do the same thing once. That's my saying. And it's true. I mean, what Robin is describing as compared to what I'll just describe it as the live entertainment division, is so incredibly different. The one thing that we have in common, or a couple of things that we have in common, is that story comes first. And because without story, everybody's sailing on a rudderless ship, so to speak. But in the live entertainment world, we have much, much shorter timelines to develop and to create and to implement and install the work that we do, typically. The longest timeline project I think I've been involved in was maybe a year at the most. I don't think even Fantasmic was a year. At least it wasn't a year for me. I think it was more like 9 or 10 months. And we were working in an environment where live entertainment is always working in an environment that is almost always pre-existing. We're not building with a few exceptions, we're not building our own venues for the shows that we do. I'll give you an example. When I say venue, Haunted Mansion's been there since 1968 or something.
I don't trivia.
Something like that. You weren't even born.
It's 68 or 69, because I think it's 50 this year, so it's probably maybe 69.
Right. So when we're talking about Haunted Mansion Holiday, which is the transformation to the characters from Nightmare Before Christmas, the amount of time that we had for that was I think the creative director probably started conceiving it and started thinking about it maybe 6 months before. But then there was the whole process of vetting the budget and making sure that that project was really going to happen before we jumped in with both feet to make it happen. And so probably maybe 3 months in advance, I don't remember exactly. There's so much water under the bridge for me that I can't remember all of these details. But it couldn't have been much more than about 3 months from the time we started talking about music and getting the music conceived and prepared and ready to go. That was unusual also when I say we never do the same thing once, because the very next year we did it over again. Now, we didn't do the visuals over again, but there were some additions for the second year, and about 2/3 of the music was redone. So, I'm getting a little off track here, but in terms of the development process, once a creative director has been given the go-ahead to start developing something, they usually start, again, with artwork. They start with the story and the artwork, but they're developing the artwork and the story at the same time, especially certain creative directors whose brains work that way. They think visually, so they'll develop artwork, and that was the case with Haunted Mansion. The artwork came along with the storyline, and the storyline was, of course, derived from the film. So there was a lot of it that was, almost assumed to be part of the attraction because of the way it was in the film. So I don't want to get too far past the development side of things here.
We'll come back to that, though.
Yeah.
Because I want to hear about the scoring and all of that. I really want to hear about that.
Okay. And we're working at a very rapid pace because now we have a deadline. There's no moving deadline for entertainment, live entertainment in the parks. It's rare. I could probably count on the fingers of one hand the times we delayed an opening of something. In the 30 years that I worked there, it just doesn't happen. So our timelines are much more compressed. And our review process is compressed. And our review process changed a lot over the years that I was there too. So we became much more integrated with WDI, Walt Disney Imagineering, in the last 10, 15 years than we were before that time. And we started to do more cooperative projects, or projects where, because the live entertainment division was accustomed to working so much faster, or the idea for a new project would come from the live entertainment division, then we would take the reins for that and run with it and collaborate with partners at WDI to assure that we were not, corrupting the concept for the themed area, for example, which is always a sensitive issue.
Well, no, that's an interesting question too.
You put it so
How
nicely.
much of the how much is there a flow from one direction to the other? Because the attractions beget the shows, and the shows also beget the attractions. The films beget some attractions. Obviously, Pirates was redone to more closely, well, the film was inspired by the attraction and then turned around and inspired it back again, so.
Yeah, it's gotten a lot better. WDI gets real sensitive. If you come into, DC, if you come into California Adventure Hollywood and you put, fairies in there and start doing Pixieland, yeah, we get ticked off, right? So we've gotten a lot better. And I just had a meeting last week talking with entertainment about a show 4 years from now. And I seek them out aggressively because I want to be able to incorporate, I don't want big black speakers on sticks in the middle of a themed area. I want to incorporate their big old monster speakers in the show sets 4 years ahead of time. So the more information I can get out of entertainment, which is very hard 4 years in advance to get story out of entertainment.
Yes.
But yeah, we're getting a lot better at it, I think, because WDIA gets pretty sensitive about.
Yeah, we've merged our processes much more and better as time has gone on. You might think to yourself, well, why didn't they always do that?
Because we weren't
I
there.
It's
don't
a
have an
learning
answer for
process.
that.
It's a learning process. Because, we make mistakes. That's why. We make mistakes. Hopefully we learn from mistakes are good. You want mistakes to be excellent and useful in your career, right? So you want that to be a good mistake. The only way it's a good mistake is if you fix it the next time. And you have to have willing partners that listen to you. Say, yeah, you're right. We don't want to make that mistake again and again, because we do make mistakes much more than once. We do them over and over and over again. So,
Right.
yeah.
As corny as it may sound, a lot of us still subscribe to many of the things that Walt Disney said originally about the parks. And
That's not corny, that's history. That's not corny, that's history.
yeah, and there are two things about Disneyland in particular, and the Magic Kingdom and Walt Disney World, and that is, I think, should always try and keep in mind. And one is that the parks, the idea behind the parks sprang from not just the films, but from the characters in the films. And I'm not saying that very well, but it's about the characters and it's about the stories in the films. And that's the foundation for the vast majority of what's in those two parks. Other parks have other stories. So, and one of the things that Walt Disney always said was that, as long as there's imagination left in the world, Disneyland will never be finished. And that's what keeps people employed.
Yeah, so Guardians, you guys have maybe been on the Guardians Tower. So they came to us with the idea of destroying Tower of Terror, which broke my heart. And, you get emotional, right? And you say, no, I'm not going to work on that project. Are you kidding me? I'm not going to be associated with that. But then you say, you know what? I'm going to get real close to it and make it as good as it can possibly be. And that was more of an entertainment experience where we had a year to get that attraction going. And so we started immediately in the evenings every night writing and testing.
And you just told me you've been on it like 4,000 times now?
To mix it, we had to be, I had to write it.
So let's talk
A lot,
about the
like
infrastructure and the
4,000
mixing,
times.
because I think it's really interesting. It's a completely different mindset for mixing, I think, than what, for me, mixing is to go into a room in a place that I have always lived,
Yeah.
and I really know the four walls and
Yeah.
the speaker setup, and it sounds a certain way. I
When-
don't have to sit in a boat in the middle
Yeah.
of a lake in Pirates.
Yeah, you have to kind of push yourself. But
Let's talk
yeah,
about that.
doing theater's fun, but I always feel confined, like left, center. I don't know how many were theater designers, but I always feel kind of confined into, Berkeley Rep. That's a Myers system. It's going to have to be a Myers design. You're confined to what they have. But being a control freak, as most Imagineers are, I get to design and select every single one of my speakers usually. It's fun writing it over and over and over again. So on something like Guardians, you sit. I had to get open within the year. And not only with one show, all of a sudden it turned into 6 shows overnight. As we were in the middle of install, hey, can you do 6? let me rephrase that. What do you need to do to get to 6? So, I was running 2 different shafts, 2 different teams, 2 different parts of the shows, and I would merge them together. So, you park in a scene, you mix a scene, move the Pro Tools rig off the carriage, get out, go safety check it, wait the half hour, get in, buckle up, see if it works, move back in. And every time we had to, that was a QSIS show, so every time we reload up the show and lock it, you get to ride every shaft 6 times. And then, you had the Halloween show, and that's 7 times. So to QC it at the end, every time it's, 42 rides. So once or twice a day. So, is that right? Yeah, that's about right. So it's, you get used to it. I won't do anything that spins.
Okay, I'm okay on the spinning. I'm just not okay on the dropping.
Yeah. No, it gets to be fun. We were having a good time with it at the end. But that year-long development and install process made for a very intimate team. It was really nice.
Yeah. That sounds luxurious and wonderful to me.
So what is your process then? Talk to me a little bit about the transformation of the Haunted Mansion, because the music is different, the scenes are different. What goes into the recording process of that, and how did you take the score and transform such an iconic thing into what I think is the greatest movie ever?
Haunted Mansion is a fascinating attraction just on its own. If you think about it, before the transformation to Nightmare Before Christmas, it's just a great experience. From the moment you walk through the gate, coming up to the mansion, and I also have to say that a lot of these attractions change and evolve over the years, both technologically and creatively. There are enhancements, there's revisions, there's little additions, improvements along the way. And I don't know that it's even still there, but there used to be a sound effect coming from the horseless carriage. I don't think it's there anymore. I don't know why.
Pulled the EEPROM out.
Yeah. Pulled the EEPROM out. EEPROM. You remember EEPROMs? Electrically erasable, programmable, read-only memory.
They look like little spiders. You plug them in. They play sound.
From the minute you walk through the gate, you would hear that headless horse carriage, headless horse carriage. Then I don't think there was any background music outside until we installed Nightmare Before Christmas. We put background music for the queue line area to entertain guests while they're in the queue line. But then you walk up onto the porch and you walk into the foyer, and there's music playing in the foyer. And then when the elevator doors open, and there's a spiel. A spiel is dialogue, basically, that many of our attractions have. And so the spiel gives you a little bit of background information before you get into the elevator. You get into the elevator, and the spiel follows you into the elevator, and it's the ghost host voice, which originally was a person named Paul Frees, who has a wonderful voice, and he did a lot of voiceover work for Disney in his career. And the ghost host gives you a little bit more of the story. The story started when you walked through the gate and you heard that headless horse carriage. It continued when you walked into the foyer and you heard the spiel and you heard the music that accompanied that. It continued when you walked into the elevator and the ghost host kept telling you are these are these walls stretching, or I don't remember the exact wordage, but
These walls actually stretching?
yeah, is it your imagination? So that kind of sets you up to experience the rest of the attraction, because now you've been programmed to use your imagination. You get down to the bottom of the elevator and you walk out and through the hall of mirrors. Is it still called the hall of mirrors? No, what is it?
Portrait?
Hall of portraits. Sorry, I wanted to say mirrors, but I knew it wasn't wrong. And each one of these portraits, the eyes of these figures in these portraits follow you going down the hall to the load zone, and there's music accompanying that. You get to the load zone, load in, and there's more spiel. And you get into the cars, and there's spiel in the cars as you go through the attraction. And the spiel is in the car, but the music is in the areas that you're going through. You ride in the cars, and as you go through, I won't get heavy into the technology of it, but the cars basically trip the spiel. There's a sensor. You get to a certain location in the ride, and it trips the sensor, and that triggers the spiel for the next section in the cars.
But the music is in the
and
actual building, not in
The
the
music
car
is in the
itself?
actual building.
Okay, that's
So
interesting.
you go through the attraction that way, and when you get into the graveyard, there's all kinds of little sound moments that happen in the graveyard. And then you go to the exit ramp, and you, as you exit up the ramp, there's a figure that we lovingly call Little Leota, who says, "Hurry back." I'm trying to think of the standard attraction, because then I'll talk about what's different. I think that's the last thing that you hear as you exit the attraction. If you ride it from beginning to end, from the time you, I think from the time you get in the cars, after you've gone through the foyer and the elevator and the hall of portraits, from the time you get in the cars to the end of it, it's about 6 minutes, if I recall. As long as they don't do a stop for ADA compliance, which, of course, we need to and want to do. So the attraction could stop at any time, and it could stop more than once to allow the loading of somebody from a wheelchair into one of the cars, or some other disabled person. So that's the original experience of that, and all of the goodies that come along the way when you go through the grand ballroom area, and you go through the attic, and then you go through the graveyard. It's all integrated with this story and this grim grinning ghost theme. And it's all variations on that grim grinning ghost theme, if I'm not mistaken.
So when you have to score this, obviously you don't do it at the park. You go to a studio and you have an orchestra come in, and you have done the arrangements or the orchestrations. And
I didn't do the arrangements in this particular case, but I produced the recordings for it and was responsible for getting all of that done.
how does the
the
timing
current
work out
version-
for that? Because
Pardon me?
it creates, like you said, the music is in the building, but it creates a continuous effect as you're going through it, but it doesn't seem to recirculate very much. It's continuous throughout the
Right,
whole
right.
experience.
Especially with the Nightmare version. The person who did the version that currently runs and from the second year on was John Debney, was the composer for that. And he took, with Danny Elfman's permission, he took Danny Elfman's themes and arranged them, and they were orchestrated and recorded, I believe, at Warner Brothers Eastwood Scoring Stage. All of the orchestra music. And then it was mixed. Vocals were added. Everything was mixed to stems, which provides for additional flexibility in the attraction for balancing things, remixing things. So we would have, vocal stems, depending on what the program material is. It might be multiple vocal stems, orchestra stems, sound effects stems, all of these various different stems that would be laid out in those days in a Pro Tools session. And then mixed and mastered according to what their application was going to be. So in the case of changing it over to Nightmare Before Christmas, we didn't want to abandon Granny Ghosts completely. And it still remains in the graveyard as a theme, but it's arranged differently. The vocals in particular are different, and each one of the sound effects and special little musical moments are different. So all of the voices in the graveyard are new, and they're each doing their thing. We also added voices to the area where they call it the endless hallway is. So, and we added a whole bunch of different little things along the way, some of them not so little, that really helped nail the story for Nightmare Before Christmas. So, for example, when you get into the elevator, I hope this is not a spoiler thing for anybody, but when you get into the elevator, there is the imagery inside the elevator, and all of the artwork and the entire attraction has been changed to fit the story of Nightmare Before Christmas. So when you get into the elevator and the lightning goes off, you can see, if you look up, you'll see an image of Jack Skellington's head up there.
Now, do these things change slightly from year to year, or have they pretty much stayed the same over the last few years?
I think it kind of stabilized after a couple of years. From the second year on, we added, I'm trying to think of what we added. Oh, well, do I have that? No, that's the other attraction. We added sound effects in the elevator, so that we had this huge glass breaking effect and the sound of a body falling in the elevator as the elevator expanded and it arrived at its descent. We added in the endless hallway, we added the ghost dog from Nightmare Before Christmas. And we added a different barking sound effect for that. We added...
Because there's
there
no
were a
dog in
couple
the
of-
normal Haunted Mansion has no dog, right?
Right. And
Well, the dog by the
there's
the
a
skeleton
hellhound.
head guy, right?
Yeah, there's
yeah.
a hellhound
I know his guy.
that you
I
hear
don't know his name.
at the beginning, and you also hear it at the end. And that's one sound that I didn't change, because it doesn't have a visual to it anyway, and I wanted to keep that.
So when you have to make the transition between the regular Haunted Mansion and the holiday version, the attraction closes for a period of time. What goes on while it's closed, if you can share it without sharing any proprietary information, and how long does it take?
Well, I believe it closes for about 30 days. And in that period of time, all of the scenic has changed. So another thing that was added that doesn't appear in the regular attraction is the Jack Skellington figure itself, which is at the beginning of the graveyard scene, and the dialogue that goes with Jack Skellington. So, and then we, I think the third year we added the Oogie Boogie figure near the exit ramp, just before you get to the exit ramp. So
Were these the
enhancements and
original
changes
character
like that.
voices? Did you bring in the original character voices for these things, or?
As much as we possibly can, we use the original character voices. In the case of Oogie Boogie, we did go with the original voice for that. We used and recorded the original voice for Jack Skellington.
Do they do
Some
the
things
VO
for-
on the lot? Because I know they do a lot of the animation VO on the lot. Do they do the dialogue recording there, or do they do that off-site?
I generally, and almost always, not almost always worked with our character voice division called Disney Character Voices to assure that we had the right voice for any particular project, and we would record it with their engineer and their processes in order to make sure that we had the right sound for the voice, or as close as humanly possible. I mentioned Paul Frees earlier. Paul Frees is long gone, so our ghost host for the Nightmare Before Christmas we wanted it to be Paul Frees. So we managed to do an amazing thing, which I won't tell you. But I think it's pretty darn great. And it still gives you the character of the ghost host, the original ghost host, because we wanted to preserve that. We wanted to preserve Madame in the seance room. And
Wasn't
so
her daughter
we changed the story, and we redid that, and I think it came out terrifically well. Dialogue is different, but the image is the same.
So you take all of these dialogue stems and music stems and effects stems and sit in the middle of the attraction on a platform or in a boat and mix them to perfection.
Not exactly.
Not exactly.
Because both with Small World Holiday and Haunted Mansion Holiday, these have to be able to go in, and come back out with whatever additions and modifications that the holiday show might need. And because there is not really an opportunity in the timeline that we have to do a great big reconception of the audio system, and it doesn't really seem necessary to do that anyway. The vast majority of what I produced for Haunted Mansion Holiday was literally a replacement for the audio that was there. So there were only a few instances, and I think I mentioned them all already, where we added a speaker or an additional audio source. And so it was intentionally made to be as changeable as easily as possible. So, for example, the foyer music. I analyzed the foyer music that was there. We talked about it creatively, what it wanted to be for the Nightmare show. That was recorded and produced that way so that it could just be changed out. Of course, new levels were set. Things like, if we discovered we didn't like the EQ of what was in the new recording. If there was anything about it that we didn't like, we would adjust the recording rather than adjust the system, because that would mean when we're changing it back in January, that some of it would have to come back and retweak everything that went back into the standard show.
So you just adjust your recording rather than adjusting the infrastructure that's already there?
Yeah, we didn't adjust the audio infrastructure very much at all. But I will say that these attractions over time have had evolving audio infrastructures. For example, Small World Holiday is the easiest one to think about. Started out with cartridges, tape cartridges, and each one of these scenes in there had its music on its own tape cartridge, and it was a 1 minute loop, and it would stop and start over again. Wow. That's how originally it was built. When that technology was superseded by better technology, people at WDI took it upon themselves, wisely so, to embrace the new technology and upgrade it. So Small World, for example, has had 3 or 4 upgrades over the years in terms of audio technology. And at the point at which, I got involved in producing music for a holiday show, I just planned on using the technology that was already there, and use it in the same way. There are ongoing maintenance for these attractions, as you might imagine. So when a speaker goes bad, they have to replace it with another speaker, and sometimes they don't have the same speaker available. So somebody has to go in and make that kind of a change and maybe look at it more comprehensively.
Yeah, in terms of anyone who's like a gearhead, I think in my career we've changed out from, we started with EPROMs, which are those little like, I guess they're kind of a flash, the first form of flash, and you actually had to plug them in the right order or they wouldn't play right. And bin loops, you guys know what a bin loop is? It's actually a tape that winds around until it comes back to the beginning again, and the bin has to be as big as it needs to be to fit the loop. And then we changed to digital bin loops, right? And they took flash media, and years ago we had to shave off 3 seconds of the BGM because there was only 100 megs on a flash disk. I mean, we were like cutting down to accommodate the biggest card that we had on Earth. Now you can go buy, terabytes on a little drive, so we don't have to do that anymore. And now recently we're starting to use QSYS cores, which is more of a computer drive system.
Has everything been updated, or are any of them still running on the antiquated technology?
On a bin, well, there's still, I believe the bin loop's still in the park behind Lincoln.
Yeah.
There's still a bin loop in the park. It's not being used.
There are bin loops in various places. I mean,
it's tape. It's,
You can imagine how incredibly expensive it is to install some of these systems when you're talking about dozens and dozens of speakers and amplifiers and wiring and reproducers and everything else under the sun that it takes to get audio from the source to its destination. And to change that and upgrade it is incredibly expensive. So it doesn't necessarily happen every time new technology comes along. It's not like, we don't go out and buy a new Mac computer every time one comes along. We make the one work that we have as long as we can, and until something else pushes us to make that change.
Until you can't find parts anymore. As soon as you can't find parts, it's all over. So
Yeah, so my philosophy about producing the audio for the Haunted Mansion was that it should be this kind of a scenario where you bring in the new audio sources as they're changing the scenic in the attraction, and then you test and adjust and listen and mix and make those changes according to what you hear during your test and adjust period. Unfortunately, the test and adjust period for the Haunted Mansion Holiday Show is almost non-existent because it takes so long for the art to be changed out, the scenic to be changed, that they use every bit of amount of a time as they can get, all the way up until even the day that it's opening as the holiday attraction, to make those changes. And you can't really test and adjust audio while they're installing new scenic, because there's some places where the scenic isn't in. There are some places where scenic is now being put in front of a speaker that existed in a position that made sense for the original show, but now there's a piece of something in front of it, whatever it might be. They put artificial snow in the graveyard. That changes the sound of the graveyard entirely. But they don't necessarily get it in any amount of time for you to have quality time to change anything. So you have to make educated guesses, and you have to, coordinate with the technicians who are installing the scenic, not the technicians, but the technical director, and in my case, I'm not an engineer, so I don't put my hands on a mixing console in the venue or anything like that. I work with an audio technician who is familiar with the software and the systems that are there, and I direct them to make the changes that I want. And so the amount of time we have to do that is really very much reduced. And we might only ride through 2 or 3 times before the attraction opens. But we benefit from all of the work and all of the thinking that has gone in to the basic attraction before we went in there.
But you run into some odd situations, like you said, with the batting and the artificial snow and the holiday gifts that are suddenly in front of everything.
Right.
That was something I hadn't even thought about.
Right.
And then you have to remix based on obstacles.
Right. And the remixing takes place in, the last time we did it, we had a media matrix system in there that allowed us to change EQ and levels in a setup in the back of the attraction where all of the audio racks are. And so we would make adjustments there, go out, and we wouldn't even ride through some of the times when there was an opportunity to go out and just stand there. The first time we did it, it was very difficult, and we had more time the first time we did it. But you just stand there and listen to, like the barking dog at the endless hallway. Is that the right level? Okay, it's the right level if you're outside a car. How about if you're inside a car? So you sit in a car. Well, how about if these cars are in groups of 3 or 4 cars? How about if you're in the end car down there? Is that an adequate representation for that?
Well, and those cars turn too. It's not
the
a static
cars turn
facing
and change your
forward thing.
focus.
So
Yeah, they turn and change your focus to a specific thing that we want you to look at and hear. And it's interesting because those cars, those clamshell type of vehicles, also tend to act as another pair of ears. If you ever do this when you listen, well, that's clamshell behind you does that as well. So we learn to make educated guesses about how loud something should be based on our observations from the front car, the middle car, the end car, and based on how it works when we just walk through the attraction, even though that's not the ultimate and most valid way to evaluate it. So I just thought of everything I could possibly think of in order to be able to get this done and get it done well in the amount of time that we had. And all of those ideas, came to me along the way as we were developing. I'm thinking, well, how am I going to solve that problem? And how am I going to solve this problem over here? And what about this extra thing that the director wants, this Jack Skellington's figure? How are we going to make that work when we've got a whole graveyard of music and voices going on in a very cacophonous way, and you come down this ramp and your car turns towards Jack Skellington as it's turning past Jack Skellington, and you're starting to look at the first part of the graveyard. How do we get that part of the story across to the people that are not just in the first car, but the second, third, and fourth car?
It's a very slightly different experience depending on which car you're in, isn't it?
Yeah, and the Ghost Host spiel is triggered. Also, it's different if you're on the first car versus the second or third or fourth car, because it's triggered in all of the cars in that unit at the same time. So the Ghost Host may be perfectly timed for the last car, but not perfectly timed for the first car. So there are compromises in how things are adjusted in order to make that be the most optimal experience.
Oh, go for it.
So you've answered some of my questions about how everything stays in sync, that it's triggered by the cars. How on earth do you keep the parade moving in sync so that people standing by the side of the road are hearing a continuous thing? It's always amazed me
secret.
that, and how has it evolved over the years? Because I imagine it's changed quite a bit. Like the bin loop thing, I imagine that the parade technology has changed quite a bit over the years as well.
Parade technology has changed tremendously. In 1972, there was a creative director named Bob Yanni who dreamed up the idea of the electrical parade, the Main Street electrical parade. And that, the need to have a totally pre-recorded parade where you could have multiple floats, each playing different music, but stay in sync with the basic theme, that task gave rise to new technology and new ways of doing things. And that technology and those ideas about how those things are accomplished, both musically and technologically, evolved over the years and got better and better and better to the point where it just became, it has a life of its own, that whole way of presenting a show. When you're in an attraction and in a vehicle, you're moving through all of the music. When you're standing on the street, the music is moving past you. In the parade audio system, this gets really, really deep. But in the parade audio systems, there's something like 250 speakers in the system. And what started out as far fewer speakers that were grouped together in what we called zones. Like, it used to be that half of Main Street was a zone, and then the other half of Main Street was a zone. And Town Square was a zone by itself. And when a parade came out of what we call Egg House Gate in Town Square, and music would come up in the first zone, it would fade up into the next zone. We developed an idea. We wanted to be able to have a new, fresh start for each group of the audience that would see a parade. So, because the people on Main Street, they might hear something going on down in Town Square, but the show wasn't in front of them. They didn't have anything to look at yet. So we'd start the show for the people in Town Square. We'd want to have a clean start for the people on Main Street, or maybe even split it up, but typically not. And then at the hub, a clean start for all of the people at the hub. And then from Matterhorn Road all the way down to Small World, have another clean start for all of those people there. So we developed an idea called an opening window, which was a piece of music that would start the parade and then make a transition into what we would call a traveling loop. So you could have a clean start with an opening window in each one of those areas. It would transition into a traveling loop. And then as the parade left you, you had the option of either letting it fade out as it naturally would visually, or you could put what we call the closing window on it and put an ending on it for each one of the areas where the audience was. That's kind of the high points of it. There's a lot more that goes into it. And in order to either avoid musical conflict between units or to manage musical conflict between units in different ways, we employ different techniques. If you wanted to have a seamless parade the way a Christmas fantasy parade is, those are continuous loops. There are no ends or beginnings to that music. It all just keeps going. But as each unit passes in front of you, the previous unit fades away, and both on the float and in the house speaker system at the same time, which stay in sync. I hesitate to talk about this because it's kind of abstract, and I think people's eyes glaze over when I talk
Well, I was
about
curious
this.
because, especially with the parade at California Adventure, the Toy Story parade, there seem to be such different segments to it. It's not so much of a continuous similar music. It's they're very character driven.
Right.
So that music, it's really obvious when you're in a certain section of the parade.
Right. So in that parade, and in a more subtle way, the Christmas Fantasy Parade is the same kind of approach, but in the Toy Story Parade, there was a section of the musical loop, the traveling loop, that was the theme of the parade. And so it became an arranging task to arrange the music so there was this theme that kept coming around, but then you would transition out of that theme musically into the character piece of music that was appropriate for that unit, whether it be Bug's Life or any of the other. It was the Pixar Play Parade,
Right, exactly.
whether it's Toy Story or any of the other Pixar themes that were there, so that you had a good chance that when you were fading from one unit to another, that about a third of the time you were doing it during the theme that was the common material to all of the units. So about 33% of the time, you would never hear any conflict at all. the other 2/3 of the time, you might hear conflict, or you might not hear so much conflict, depending on how the audio is programmed. So as a unit, each one of these floats has a tracking device on it. And that technology has changed over the years. And I believe they're using GPS now, but we resisted that for a long time. As the float passes by you, the computer in Audio Central knows where the float is, and it tells the music in the house speakers to fade out or fade up for the next one. And the amount of time that happens between the fade out of one and the fade up of the next one is adjustable. So, and a lot of it has to do with the performers on the street and what they need to hear in order to be able to perform their routines. So if there's a lot of performers on the street in front of a float, we want that music to come up sooner, so that it's up when the performers are in front of those speakers, and they can hear the music they're performing to. And if it's a really, really long float, then we want it to stay up in the speakers longer so that it doesn't disappear too soon, or it doesn't get intruded upon by the float behind it, the music for the float behind it. So all of these programming adjustments have to be scripted and adjusted and tested. And the music has to be written in a certain way to achieve that kind of a result. If you want it to be completely synchronized the way the Main Street Electrical Parade is, then you had to, for each one of the units, like the Cinderella unit, you had to write Cinderella themes in counterpoint to the Baroque hoedown, which was the underliner. So that became a musical task of writing counterpoint, but not free counterpoint the way you would hope to do it. You were handcuffed to needing to write counterpoint using themes from a specific Disney film.
Are you constrained by tempos for that? Do you have to keep everything at about
You-
the same tempo?
If you want it to be completely synchronized, you're constrained by tempos. But the Toy Story Parade, the Pixar Play Parade, is not constrained by tempos. Each one of the 2/3 of each one of those loops often are at different tempos, different from the main theme, different from each other. And the challenge there is to get all of the loops to be the exact same length down to the frame.
That's what I was going to say. They have to land at the same time, and often
Yes.
they have to be constrained to a tempo or a fraction of.
Right.
Right. You know, you could have 4/4 over 3/4s. Eventually, they're going to land in the same place.
Right. So one of the people that worked on the Main Street Electrical Parade, his name was Don Dorsey. You may be familiar with him. A great engineer and a great synthesist, and did a lot of work on the Main Street Electrical Parade. And he and I worked together, joined at the hip, on a great many parades. And I would come up with an idea and say, let's try this time. Instead of doing that, where we were obliged to write counterpoint using other themes to be in sync with an underliner, how about if we make a separate underliner for each float and just crossfade from underliner to underliner in the house system as we, and keep that in sync with each float. So now we don't have that kind of musical problem. We've got a potentially better musical solution to representing these songs in the parade. And we've got more control over any kind of conflict between the float and the house. And so we just kept working with ideas like that.
And I would imagine that the technology now enables more consistent sync between things.
It can. if you're careful enough to be consistent in what you produce. That's the hard part about parades, is that the reason that the loops had to be exactly the same length to the frame edge is because of the playback format, which was the Alicorn McBride digital bin loop. Before that, we were on tape. We were on 2-inch tape, 16-track 2-inch tape that was on a, what's the larger reel size, the 10-inch reel and then
14-inch, 10 or
14-inch. We had a 14-inch reel of 2-inch tape that each one of the musical unit pieces was dubbed to using a bin loop to dub it to that 2-inch tape. And the old Main Street Electrical Parade ran that way, and many parades after that. And the person doing the dubbing would sit there with a VSO on the machine that they were using for playback and control the speed of it to make sure that it would stay in sync with the other tracks that were already on it. We were really happy when we got rid of that technology. And went to the Alicorn McBride digital bin loop. But that then meant that we had to produce our audio differently in order to make sure that, if you did a continuous loop, say a 2-minute continuous loop that had audio at the top and tail all the way through, it never took a breath, then that frame edge, the music at that frame edge had to be able to work going back to the beginning without a glitch. And I'm proud to say that I never produced a parade that had a glitch in it. But it was hard to do because of that feature. Now, when we're on QSYS and hard disk playback, it doesn't have to be on the frame edge because the resolution is now down to the millisecond, I believe. So it's a lot easier to
we still
make
glitch.
adjustments to the looping point.
It's hard.
It's still hard.
Yeah, you still have to match your sine waves up.
Yeah, you still have to be very careful about how you write it, how you record it, how you mix it, and how you edit it in order to make it work without a glitch.
Yeah, you have to write it properly. I sat in the studio with Debney for 6 months for Mystic Manor, and we had to carve every note. Debbie Lurie, she worked with Danny Elfman for Mystic Manor's the ghostly attraction in Hong Kong. I don't know if anyone's been to Hong Kong. So, yeah, we spent 5 years making the attraction, but to get everything to match up from scene to scene properly, and this was a really tricky show where there's a piece of magic dust that comes out of a music box, and this dust enchants everything around it. And so the main character of the show is the music dust, and it's supposed to carry you from room to room, but it's not looping like Small World. You have a story arc for every scene that you're in. So you start a story every time you enter a scene, and as you're entering a scene, another group's coming behind you starting the scene you just saw. So it's very tricky to both end and start a scene without knowing when the next group's coming in, because dispatch, who knows when people are going to decide to sit down and buckle up, They
Right.
just do what they want to do. So
I've never had to tackle that kind of a problem myself.
that's a good 4-year math problem.
Yeah. The Haunted Mansion, both the Haunted Mansion standard show and the holiday version are rather loose in terms of the position, how the story is presented relative to the position of the audience. The audience could be at the beginning of a room coming into it and hear something completely different each time they come into the room. I tended to favor longer loops. Small World Holiday originally was a 1-minute loop, and I changed it to 2-minute loops for the holiday version because I wanted to incorporate either Jingle Bells with It's a Small World or Deck the Halls for the finale room with It's a Small World, and I wanted to be able to do it in a way that it would be the least repetitive it could possibly be. So I changed it to a 2-minute loop, and I wrote an arrangement that allowed for a natural musical flow through both of those songs. And but what it also meant was, as you made your way through the attraction, you might only hear 25, 50% of the music for that area. The good news is that the story is not so incredibly complex that you need to hear all of it. And the good news is that you could ride the attraction 3 times and get a different experience all 3 times. You hear something different, a little bit of different ear candy each time. And I found that to be a positive. So that's why I approached that way. And with the exception of the graveyard in the Haunted Mansion show, I believe I extended the loop length of just about everything else in the holiday show as well, for those same reasons. It's particularly valuable, I think, in the Haunted Mansion when they have to make a stop for an emergency or for ADA compliance or something like that, and you're sitting there for another 2 minutes or 3 minutes while they're loading something else, and you're hearing the same thing over and over and over again. So I took it upon myself to make those choices. I didn't tell anybody.
Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you guys want to talk about? If not, maybe we'll open it up to questions from the floor.
Questions might be better.
Okay.
I feel like I've talked way too much.
Does anybody have any questions on the floor? Christina's going to handle the microphone here. Please speak into the microphone for the questions, because we are streaming and recording, and we want to be sure that everybody can hear what goes on.
I'll stop here. All righty. This is for Robin. Robin, I know there's so many effects that you use in all these rides. Well, they're not rides. I forgot the.
Apparently, they're attractions.
The attractions. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Do you guys record a lot of your own effects, or you have a huge library? Because I imagine when you're designing the whole thing, it's almost like, I come from the film side of things, and you look at the what you're trying to tell, the story and everything, and you literally make a gigantic library on pencil sometimes of all the things you're going to need. And could you talk a little bit about that process and things you decide you're going to need to record, or your sound effects library, and et cetera?
Yeah,
So,
sure. My preference in all of my attractions is that everything is original. So hopefully all the voices are originally recorded, the music's fresh and new, and the sound effects as well. So you'll see Imagineers with pictures will be out in a swamp. We've had jaguars in Studio A recording jaguars. We'll travel the world and record different musical people, things from other countries. It depends, but yeah, we invest a lot in original recording. It's not my preference to go to, what is that, the General 6000? Pop in track 73. Yeah, we have partners who specialize in different kinds of recordings. Some recordings are really hard to get. How do you record wind? That's tough. right? Do you hang things up that excite the wind, right? It's not the sound of the microphone being excited by the wind. It's the sound of wind through ... How do you record particularly loud sounds, explosives, jet engines, that kind of thing? You can't just go out and record them because everything distorts. So we do have specialists that we'll go to for certain types of sounds. I don't expect to know it all for sure. I think one of the best assets you can have as a producer is knowing people who know things, right? Lots of people who know things, and people are specialists. So if you need an aerial photographer, you get an aerial photographer. So yeah, we will hopefully have the budget and the time to spend, the weeks and weeks it takes to create those sounds, to build devices, to Foley it out, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'll spend months on attraction sound gathering. It's definitely not 5.1. No, most attractions within one scene, you 27, 28.1.1 sometimes, which might be a sub track and maybe a tactile transducer, or something else weird that it's excited by waveforms. Who knows what that is, but we come across some things.
You were talking a little bit about nostalgia and with the changeover from Tower of Terror to Mission Breakout, and I was curious. I'm thinking, of older attractions where there might be outdated equipment or recordings that don't hold up as well over time. I'm just to stay away from anything people might love too much. The example I'll use is say the Casey Jr. train, which I'm assuming neither of you worked on. So something like that where, the speakers are kind of old and funky and the loop actually doesn't really loop in the right place and there's a weird part where it goes quiet for no reason. Things like that. At this point, I assume is it a question of they're 3 and 4, they don't care, or is it more no, that's part of the charm? How do those decisions about retrofitting older rides, even ones that say that are more popular than that, but how does those decisions about retrofitting older rides, how much of that is just budget and time and not enough good people, and how much of it is actually, no, this is part of what makes it what it is?
Yeah, I have one for that.
Great question.
We were gonna, so Snow White,
Yeah.
right? And the wishing well, she's sitting there and she's singing, and it's Snow White, right? It's the voice of Snow White, not a spring chicken, right? And the recording is old. And so we wanted to redo the wishing well in Hong Kong, and we have these nice shiny speakers. I think they were 8196s, and we're putting the speakers out there, and we have to play this old crackly recording on it. And we thought, wow, we need to record this. We need to do this again. And so, what do? Well, we called her in. Let's see what she can do. Well, she did great. But she wasn't, a 17-year-old maiden. She did great. But we couldn't use the recordings. And so, you had to decide, what do? Do we try and clean this up a little bit and use it? Do we try and get a sound alike? Right. And in the end, we cleaned it up. It's playing in a waterfall anyways. So we turned the water on and let the water take a chunk out of the audio quality to start with, and then listen to it from there. But I think it's a case by case, personally, and it's also a taste question of which land you're in and how you want it to feel. So
there are certain legacy things like that I don't think anybody really wants to change if they don't absolutely have to. So, as I'm sure Robin and her associates at WDI always strive to preserve those kinds of legacy things. We always did that too in our shows at the parks. But eventually, something comes along that demands that you change it somehow. New script. They never said that before. Any number of things that says you just have to re-record. And so you go down the path of, okay, let's get Tom Hanks. We're doing Woody. Can we get Tom Hanks? Maybe. And you just work it out. And with the help of other experts, like, character voice partners, you come up with the best results you can possibly get.
There's also a big cultural question, too. Which culture are we working in? What does that culture demand? How can we be sensitive to, what show works in one location is not going to work in another location? And now we're getting so old that a show that worked 40 years ago very well may not be appreciated in the same way
Jungle
today.
Cruise? Anybody? Jungle Cruise, by any chance?
I'm not going to say anything,
Pirates,
but
Pirates
you
was
know.
updated. There's some things in Pirates that got changed due to cultural
Pirates did get changed
changes.
because many people don't appreciate the show as it originally was today. Some people think it's funny, some people not so much. So where do you toe that line? So
There's one in the back there.
Way back there. I'm going to attempt to do this.
Hi guys, my name is Bajan. I understand a lot of what you do. I do kind of sort of similar types of things for different types of things. But I have this question. So when you're developing a show, audio, for a free space, say the electrical parade, you have multiple zones. How does time delay affect that? Do you factor that in? Because, of course, that's going to change the delivery greatly depending on where the audience is, in these large spaces. Maybe even in Pirates, in those big rooms that are there. I'm curious to know how you mitigate that.
Things are bouncing around a lot in here, and I didn't quite get everything about your question. Could you?
time delay. So in my world, time delay is huge. I think it's a really excellent question.
Okay.
Right? Your neighbors, which I call neighbors, right? So scene 3 is scene 4's neighbor, and we might be in sync, but time delay is the antithesis. I'm so jet lagged. Antithesis of proximity, right? So there's proximity effect. Often proximity effect wins, but you have to set your time delays perfectly.
And frequency dependent too, and all that sort of thing.
That's right.
And then you have acoustics and all that rigmarole.
Yeah.
Yeah, when it comes to parades, the net effect of a parade is a mono source, even though depending on where you're standing on the parade route, it could be what some people might call binaural or two-channel mono. And the delay time, the variation in delay time between the speaker that's right next to you and the float that's 50 feet away is not so apparently egregious because of what I understand to be the Haas effect, which if you're listening to two sources, the one you're closest to is the one that you're going to hear.
Right.
Especially if it's mono. So, if I understand your question, because because of that. Even if you're between two speakers on the street, or the speaker across the street is the one that is most apparent to you, as the float comes into view with an audience on the street who are absorbing a lot of audio before it gets to you, you don't hear that time delay very much unless the float has a speaker that's facing forward, pointing down the street. In that instance, or in the instance if you have a live band with drummers playing, and they're playing in sync with the float that's right behind them, you'll hear much more of a time delay problem than if it's just the float with speakers on the sides. Because you don't perceive that sound source until it's much closer to you. As long as there's a speaker playing near you.
Right, right.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it did. It's a complex, multi-layered sort of question, but yeah, I think you did.
It changes based on the venue. So a lot of times what you're maybe talking about will happen in reflections too. So we try to avoid reflected energy, right? So acoustics, traps, angles. I've had, success in just offsetting a wall, in the design phase to make sure it doesn't reflect in the direction I don't want it to go in, that kind of thing. That doubles your time delay, your arrivals, and that's a huge problem sometimes.
Yeah, and that question is prompted, I suppose, by the fact that the audio travels. I think you mentioned 270 speakers, something like that. When the audio is traveling, then it gets a lot more complex, right, to deal with. So anyway, thank you much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm always surprised at what proximity does, how powerful proximity is. I spent 3 years worrying, and then I get to the field and realize I was completely wrong. So
Right.
it's embarrassing.
Thank you.
And air is the best insulator for outside. People forget that. Oh,
One up here?
questions, lots of questions. Good. Even I've got a couple. So I have known Bruce for a long time. So.
So years ago, Disney was known for creating a lot of the technology needed to produce the attractions. And you've both mentioned QSYS quite a few times, and I imagine that's a huge time saver in producing some of the controls and the triggers and stuff that you need. Has that changed over the course on how long it takes to build an attraction? Is it a game changer, or it's just a different format?
Yeah, it takes longer.
Takes longer.
It takes longer. You can say the same thing?
It can easily take longer.
And what is it that you're trying to get more done using it? I would think it would be.
It's a surprising answer. We always think, hey, we got this new computer. It's a one and done thing. But entertainment's changed. People expect different things. Everything's more complex. Everything's more precise. The audience is more sophisticated. Our shows are more sophisticated. So whereas, when we were on a bin loop, we would make a boat ride and every room would play It's a Small World. That was cool. That was it. We were happy. It was sparkly and it was pretty, and then the kids went crazy, and now we're done, right? Now we're trying to shove Mission Breakout into a Tower of Terror building, which became incredibly complex. And that was 6 months of programming on a QSYS. So that programming, I'm still figuring out how do I document that. It's so complex and deep. So it's not apparent. Everything is kind of like, okay, hold on, I got to find that. So when I talk about writing with pencil and paper, you can spread things out and you can see the whole thing, right? And when we lean on our computers, you kind of got to dig, right? And then you got to remember what was 60 pages back. Hold on, and let me open a window, right? Things get complex and it takes time. It takes a lot more time, sometimes.
And Related to that somehow more on the hardware side, though, you were talking about having different speakers for different applications and finding the different ones. How much are you constrained by, we got to use the inventory we have versus, hey, this manufacturer just came out with a great point source or a line source or whatever it is that you need to get your job done?
So I try to work with entertainment for shared speakers, or else if I just put in a regular old Imagineering speaker, it'll probably blow up with an entertainment show, which happens more often than we'd like to talk about. But sorry, but
Are you saying we blow up your sound system?
yeah.
We do. It happened in Shanghai with me.
We just put in a new one. I would say we're constrained by space. So, there's a lot of steel, there's a lot of concrete, there's a lot of fiberglass, and I need a speaker box behind it. So how much space do I have for that speaker? And what is it good for? One speaker is good for vocals, one speaker is better for, exciting sound effects, one speaker is great for full music system with some heavy bottom end to it, So we're constrained sometimes by corporate. We have Kurt Gonzalez, our technical director. He is our golden ear. He listens to all of our speakers. He gives suggestions. We test them. What's going to hold up in the rain, in the heat, in the typhoon, in the fire display. And so those are more constraining than anything else. But it's handy to have someone like Kurt say, hey, JBL, just let this guy out, and it sounds much better than it did last year. Take a listen. And then we can listen to all those suggestions for our own shows and say, yeah, that actually sounds good. Or say, wow, none of these work. Let's go search for the right speaker. And just got to go find it.
Anybody else?
Anybody else? Oh, there we go.
Time for one more. We're about ready to
Oh,
wrap
you're going to
up.
hold me out? No, come on.
Sorry.
I found it, well, first of all, thank you both for being here. It's quite an interesting look at all this behind-the-scenes stuff, so I really appreciate it. I just found it interesting that, Robin, you opened up your remarks with the idea that, well, we got to work as a team, and we have these relationships, and we work together and all this. And then Bruce was talking about how redoing the Haunted Mansion, it's like you kept getting blindsided by people putting stuff in that, that you didn't know anything about. So it's like, it's like obviously some of the
Well, I wouldn't say we didn't know anything about them. I would say that we weren't able to make adjustments until we knew how they affected us.
Okay, maybe that sounds better. Anyway, thank you.
It's a wild world. It's theater meets construction meets entertainment. So yeah, you have vendors from everywhere. So you might talk about something and it's all on the paper, it's on the drawing, and everyone's agreed to it for 4 years, and then you get out there and there's a big old 12-inch I-beam right in the middle of the room. What did that happen? Well, that was the vendor in China. He did the shop drawings. Didn't you see them? No, I never saw them. This is where, I don't know, Olaf's supposed to stand, right? And I got a big speaker for Olaf, and now there's an I-beam in front of it, and, Olaf's mute. So things happen in the field, and I guess to be snarky, as a team, you have to adjust to it and figure out new solutions, which is kind of the exciting part. But yeah, things happen. They just happen. And,
I just have a quickie, no, not to cut you off. When you come into a project, and it's different for both of you, and I think I can attest with Bruce that, music is generally last on almost every TV, film, everything. But do you come in at a storyboard phase? Or if you're doing an insert, say, like on a Nightmare Before Christmas, do you start doing a ride-through to get how to figure out how to put it all together? Where are you given in the process of the ride or the re-engineering of a ride? Like Guardians. Do you come in at like, hey, these are the scenes, it's storyboarded, or are you on a ride-through?
Well, my projects have been derivative of the originals. Robin's process is from the ground up. I'm sure that you've done other reworks of attractions, but mostly from the ground up, they're starting from scratch.
Right.
So they would more likely be working with storyboards and models and things like that the live entertainment group doesn't necessarily need or have time to develop for some of the projects. Certainly a great many of the projects are done that way, that very same way, with storyboards and scripts that evolve and models and walkthroughs of venues and all kinds of things like that. But in the case of the Haunted Mansion Holiday, it was already pretty much all there. And I was grateful and fortunate to be able to piggyback on the work of others who had installed audio in that attraction previously and done all of these upgrades up to that point. So I took advantage of every bit of information I could get from people like Glenn Barker and the veteran media designers at WDI. Yeah.
I try to bust my way through the door at Blue Sky because often the ride schedule is well ahead of everything else. The ride and the concrete foundation schedule is ahead of everything else. So I want my foundation. I want my conduit in the foundation, and I want my ride to be friendly to the show from an audio standpoint. So if I need onboard audio, if I need acoustics, if I need it to be quiet and not loud and clunky, I want to be there in the beginning looking at servos and hydraulic versus pneumatic. I want to make sure that I have extra conduit. A lot of times I'll sneak in conduit knowing entertainment's going to want to come in the future but isn't ready.
Yeah, and these are all refinements and learnings that have come along over the years of many, many years of doing this kind of work. Planning ahead for other things.
Did that
that's
answer your
great.
question?
Yeah, no, it did. And it has to be different, like I think Bruce and you both said, as a ground-up startup, or like maybe the parade is storyboarded and choreographers are doing tempos and stuff, and you have to work within those parameters. But yeah, it does. And I think Melissa Atwell's an old friend of mine for a long time, and her gig at Disney generally goes from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And is that the same for you both too, or?
It's all over the place. Yeah. Your shifts, your hours.
Do I shift my hours?
No, it's like typically I'll fly a midnight flight to Hong Kong. I'll get in at 6 a.m. 2 days later and start working. We have to do night shifts. We have to do day shifts. It's all over the place.
We just do whatever we have to do to get it done.
And Robin just flew in from Florida today, so she's just gotten off a plane and come straight here, so thank you. Well, I think this has been a whole lot of fun. I hope everybody else enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you, Robin Broad and Bruce Healey, for sharing a very spooky AES with us and all of your expertise and dedication to the company. I'd also like to just give a quick shout out to Disney, who was amazing about allowing us to record and stream this meeting, and it will be up on the internet for a year. Thanks to the Disney company, they're awesome. So thank you all very much.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.